This episode is brought to you by the Denver Art Museum. Grab your friends for an evening of interactive fun at the Denver Art Museum's next Untitled Artist Takeover, happening this Friday, October 25th from 6 to 10 p.m. Friday's Untitled event features Slam Nuba, a legendary collective of Denver artists bringing their award-winning slam poetry to the Dam. Untitled Artist Takeover with Slam Nuba is included with general admission and free for Dam members. Reserve your tickets today at denverartmuseum.org. That's denverartmuseum.org. Today on CityCast Denver. Why does Mayor Johnston think Denverites will vote to raise their own taxes to fund affordable housing? Well, me and producer Paul Caroli sat down for our regular check-in with Mayor Mike and asked him ourselves. Plus, we got his thoughts on crime on Colfax, DPD's crackdown on expired license plates, all the restaurateurs who say Denver's not a good place to do business anymore, and his decision not to fund the Denver Basic Income Project. Today is Wednesday, October 23rd. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Mayor Mike Johnston, welcome back to CityCast Denver.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Delighted to be back.
And also joining us is producer Paul Caroli.
Hey, Bree.
So we're sitting down a couple hours before City Council is set to vote on the rezoning of Stan Kroenke's proposal to develop the parking lots around Ball Arena. And we know that Kroenke has some names picked out for this area that he will not share yet. I have to ask, have you heard any of these names?
No, I have not.
He hasn't shared these with you? I'm
There's
shocked about this.
There's like a secret name that we don't know about that's going to be the neighborhood name?
I feel like that's what Councilwoman Torres was maybe alluding to, that she had
On the Ball Arena
She was
site?
aware that there was maybe some names going around.
That's all I've heard is the common ones of River Mile for the space by the river and Ball Arena for the space by Ball Arena, very creatively named. But I'm always open for grand product reveal.
How do you feel about the plans? Are you excited about it? Or?
I am excited because I think what we want, I think gone hopefully is the era of major sporting venues being an oasis with 80 acres of parking lots around them and no other activation. What you want instead is vibrant, walkable neighborhoods where you can go and hang out for a beer, or you could live there, or you can go to a park or other concert venue. And so I'm really excited. I was actually out in Charlotte a week ago for a trip with a delegation from Denver. We looked at, among other things, their football stadium, which is in downtown Charlotte, where the Panthers play. They have 0 parking spaces at their stadium, 0. And so they rely on the infrastructure of other downtown parking structures and public transit. And so I think to restructure these as really city activation opportunities and not as big vacant parking lots is a great idea. We love it.
Well, big step could happen tonight. Listeners, of course, already know what happened, but we don't yet.
Yeah, we're
anyway,
waiting.
Let's get into the election. That's what we want to talk about.
There's one coming? I didn't know about that.
You may have heard. You may have seen the ballot. It's like 10 miles long there.
It's right next to War and Peace on my bedstand, and they're both the same
seriously.
size.
Have you voted yet?
I have done the first half of the ballot, but I have to go back for a second
You're
installment.
going piecemeal.
It's like the
Interesting.
last Harry Potter that required 2 separate films to get through it. This requires 2 sittings.
So we wanted to talk to you about your proposal to raise sales taxes by 0.5% to fund affordable housing.
Yes.
This is your big idea. It's on the ballot. People are considering it right now. It's not the only sales tax on our ballots. And so we've just been hearing from people about this is a big ask, I think it feels to some people. What do you say to those Denverites who are already struggling and who might be feeling a little grumpy about paying more?
Yeah, I totally agree with them that this is a big ask, but I also agree with them this is the biggest problem the city's facing. So I think quite literally, I ran for mayor on the idea that we had to focus on affordable housing and on homelessness. And this affordable housing problem is just getting worse and worse, and it's hitting people more and more deeply. And what we know is the single biggest bill people pay every month is their housing. And we also know that right now, 50% of the folks who rent in Denver cannot afford to live in Denver. And if we don't do something dramatic, we're going to lose 40, 50,000 families from Denver who will get pushed out of the city. And so we think that has to be a key priority. What this does is, the key about a sales tax is it's about $2 a week total that a family in Denver would pay. And yes, it's $2 a week, but what it would do is build and acquire units that are deed restricted, which is kind of a version of rent control without being rent control, which says you never have to pay more than 30% of what you make to your rent. And so the best example of this is if you are a teacher in Denver, you make around $60,000 a year. That means by that math, you should be paying $1,500 a month for rent. most folks with 2 kids or anything else are paying $2,500 in this city. So if we were to pass this, that would mean those folks that are paying $2,500 would now be paying $1,500 a month. That's saving $1,000 a month on rent for $2 a week on increases of a potential sales tax. We think that is a net great opportunity for the folks that are struggling the most. And we think if we don't do something urgent, we will be the city that goes the way of the San Franciscos or Austins, where there are no middle-class folks left living in the city anymore.
Well, the urgency we should talk about a little bit, because I've just heard some people talking about, the politics around this issue, a sales tax versus a property tax. That's typically how this kind of thing gets done in other cities. It's more common. Sales tax is regressive. A poor family is going to pay the same rate as a rich family. Why did you choose a sales tax instead of a property tax?
First of all, under Tabor and for other reasons, and a property tax in Denver, 2/3 of the property tax goes to the Denver Public Schools. So that is how our property taxes are allocated. So if we put a $50 million property tax on, then we would get $17 million of that, and Denver Public Schools would get $34 million. So property tax is not generally the strongest way to fund city services. So when you see many of the proposals that have come along recently, whether it's previous homeless resolution funds or it was things like the Climate Action Fund or others, many of those are generally funded by sales taxes in the city. But the key is all of your groceries are not covered under sales tax. Those are exempted from sales tax. All of your gas is not covered on sales tax. So if you're thinking about a working family struggling, the biggest things they're going to spend on their groceries and gas, those are not affected by this. But the other reality is the thing crushing those families the most is their cost of housing. And so we think this is actually progressive in where it focuses those dollars and how it helps change the thing that is hurting people the most.
Not everything is covered. Like if I wanted to go buy a number 10 Bo Nix Broncos jersey, that's going to have the same sales tax, and I'm going to pay the same amount that Kent Theory would pay, mega millionaire. It's not fair in that way. And not everyone who is going to be paying that sales tax is going to be benefiting from the affordable housing money you're talking about. Like, I just can't stop thinking about something that Denver Health CEO Donna Lynn told us when she was talking about the sales tax that she and the folks at Denver Health put on the ballot. She said that they chose a sales tax because they saw polling that indicated that Denverites would be more amenable to a sales tax. And ever since I heard her say that, I was just thinking, like, is this the right thing or is this the easy thing?
Yeah, no, in my mind, it is the right thing. And I think that we are, and that's for the reasons I just stated. But the key is, as you know, then I think the focus really is on the habits of folks. If you are someone that is making $30,000 a year in Denver right now because you're making minimum wage and you're working 30 hours a week, you are probably not buying a lot of $100 Bo Nix jerseys. You're probably doing everything you can to barely be able to make it by with paying your rent, paying your phone bill, and paying the grocery bill, and paying your gas bill. And so if one of those we're going to dramatically reduce and the other two of those are not affected by this tax, that is, I think, a equitable and a progressive outcome. Folks with more discretionary money are buying more Bo Nix jerseys and more retail, more, Nike shoes, whatever it might be. And so I do think that it is indexed towards the folks with the greatest need. But I think the real question is, what is the benefit of doing it? What is the impact of doing it? And I think that's where this can really be transformational. I'm excited to talk more about that.
Yeah, I have to say, I'm just thinking about that person that does make $30,000 a year and, they do end up having to pay this tax because we pass it. We're not going to get new affordable housing overnight. Like, we know that this is not going to just magically produce affordability for everybody who's struggling right now. I think that's where I think some critics would say, like, how can we guarantee this is going to be the solution?
I'm glad you asked, because there is a combination of both. There are, when we talk about the strategies we're going to use here, some of them do bring on affordability overnight. And so there are really four things we're going to do with these dollars. One is we are going to do what we call rental subsidies, which is if you are paying $1,900 a month as a retiree in this city and you can only afford to pay $1,400, we can do a 2-year master lease on that unit at $1,900. We pay $500 a month. You pay the $1,400. That unit is instantly affordable for you and it stays affordable. The second one is acquisition. We can actually buy units right now that are on the market and put a deed restriction on them so they stay permanently affordable. Deed restriction means you never have to pay more than 30% of what you make to rent. So no one can jack up the rent on you unless your income goes up. Those are units we could bring on right away. And then the third category is, yes, we're going to build new units, and those will be financed to stay affordable long term. Those take a little longer, but they are permanent, and they are important to add to the context of the city. And the fourth is home ownership. We do think it's important for people to be able to afford to buy a home in this city if you're working as a nurse for 15 years. And that's where where we provide down payment assistance so you can buy homes right now, or we have land trusts where you can buy a home, but you buy it at a discounted rate. You buy it for $300,000 instead of $600,000. But when you sell it, it can only go up about 3% a year. So you hold it for 10 years, you sell it for $330,000, you made some equity, but also the next nurse can move in and still keep it affordable. So 3 of those 4 strategies are things we can bring on right away. It's the building and permitting of new units we know takes longer and is an important part of the portfolio, but it's only one of the 4. And that's why we think this can provide urgent relief to folks that are struggling the most. And that's why we think it matters to move quickly.
Looking at the rest of the ballot, it's really long. The Denver section itself is pretty long. Is there anything else you're working on that ballot initiative specifically, but is there anything else on the ballot that you're excited or passionate about?
I think a lot of important ones on the ballot. Obviously, we're supportive of the Denver health measure. We think it's critical for folks to have care from a safety net hospital, and the only real one in the state that does that. And so we think that is important for us. I couldn't go through all 27 of them because there are a lot of really important ones. I think there are some very important ones at the state level, and things like constitutional protection of the right to choice. I think those things are going to be really important in the long term to make sure we're clear on where we stand on those. Constitutional protection for marriage and equality, I think, is really important. So I think some of those are very important, enduring civil rights questions in these uncertain times. But I do think when you talk about on the local level, what will most directly change the lived experience of a Denverite, we think if we can make sure that this is a place where both people love to live and you can be a second grade teacher and afford to live in the city, that's a game changer. And for us, what we know is this doesn't just have an impact on housing, it has an impact on the entire quality of life in Denver. If you are a firefighter or a nurse or a teacher or a server and you can't live in Denver, you still got to come here for your job. You just got to live in Thornton, or you got to live in Broomfield, or you got to live in Lone Tree. So we think this is a driver of a lot of the other downstream effects we'll see on things like climate and traffic, that if we can have folks living close to where they're working, living close to where they can take light rail or a bus rapid transit to work, that changes their experience and the city's experience.
Glad you brought up bus rapid transit, because I actually have a question about that. It's not directly about the transit itself, but there's construction starting.
Yes.
And, we're thinking a lot about this situation on Colfax right now. So businesses are going to be impacted by this construction. And then, in the last couple of weeks, the Natural Grocers announced that it was closing due to crime. And I know you accepted City Council's suggestion to add some money to your 2025 budget to support the businesses on Colfax during construction. Yep. What convinced you?
We were supportive all the time of the need to make sure we support businesses in the process. I think both things will be true. We're living through this on the 16th Street right now. It's both a great improvement, and we're excited for it to be done, and it's going to be transformational for downtown when it opens. And it's been a hard few years for those businesses that are in the midst of that construction. And we want to do everything we can to support and protect businesses on Colfax. It'll be a tough couple years of construction. But at the end, when you have a bus that comes every 4 minutes and can get you seamlessly from stop to stop quickly, and we can build more dense housing there on Colfax, folks can live there and get to and from downtown easily. We think that'll be a great benefit for the city, but we have to get from here to there. So we knew it was going to be an impact. We're delighted to support the businesses and making sure they make it through. We have a couple of other potential areas of resources we think we can use down the road to support them, so we're focused on both. But we always believed it was important. We had different estimates on how big the need would be and how many businesses will take it. And so this will allow us to budget on the conservative side, that even if 100% of the businesses take it, we could now, support them, as opposed to in places like 16th Street, the uptake's been closer to 50%.
Well, there is another factor, of course, that's been a big part of this Natural Grocers conversation. The owners of that business, they blamed crime and theft. They said that's why they're closing it. And we have a question here from a listener about this. This is from listener Sarah, who says, "Hi there. I live in Capitol Hill, sharing an alley with the Natural Grocers that's soon to be closing. And with all of the new crime data that's been reported recently, I'd like to know, what is the plan to make my neighborhood safer for me and my neighbors?"
Great. I want to talk about that in 2 phases. One is our overall data on crime we are encouraged about. It's moving in the right direction. Crime is down around 30% over the year. We've seen it about 30 or 40% reduction in auto theft, which is a huge decrease. We've seen now 95% reduction in the catalytic converter thefts we had going years ago. And so those are all really great steps forward, and not enough. And what we are hearing more and more about now is property crime, is theft from stores and from and from grocery stores, from other retail stores. And that's one we're really focused on. I'll tell you, this is a combination of what we can do at the city and what we have private partners do. I'll give you an example. You can go to 2 different grocery stores in Denver. I won't name them. Some of them you'll walk up and you'll see an off-duty police officer there at the door that is there to make sure that folks don't come in or come out with stolen goods. That's a really effective deterrent, but it takes some investment from the store. So we want to do both. We want to help drive more police presence to drive reduction in those crimes. And we also want to work with partners on what this helpful and healthy ways are they can activate and protect stores to do that. I'll tell you one of the reasons why we were both excited about the fact that we've, closed now 20 of the largest encampments in the city and been able to move people out of encampments and into housing is that dramatically frees up officer response time for other needs. And downtown Denver in 2023, almost 60% of the calls officers responded to were tents or encampments. And so with that problem gone in many of those regions because folks are now housed, that frees up a lot more officer time to be responsive on property crimes, and also frees, as we add more officers back, it allows us to have more people on patrol and on beat to be able to be out in those places. Also, little known fact, proactive patrolling and increase of the size of a police force is actually the best equity-driven way to reduce over-incarceration of people of color. Because what you have is you have kind of 2 strategies. I know it seems counterintuitive.
How?
Here's why. The policy change that dramatically drives over-incarceration is extending penalties of crimes. Because that's when you're in the system, you get charged, you get convicted, you get a long sentence. Because we know courts will overly convict and juries will overly convict people of color. The more officers you have on the street, that drives the prevention of crime, which means actually folks don't commit crimes in the first place, which means they're not in the system, which means they don't get charged. And so this is sort of one of the best prevention strategies is by reducing the amount of crimes committed in the first place, you reduce the amount of sentencing down the road. What works less well is a heavy focus on higher penalties of sticks, of lengths of charges. So particularly when you're bringing in officers that look like the communities they serve, that are more diverse, more women. We've had a great success in expanding the diversity of our cohorts, both coming into the police department and the fire department over the last couple of years. And so we think that actually helps on both public safety and on reducing over-incarceration of people of color.
This episode is brought to you by the Denver Public Library. The Denver Public Library is working to create welcoming spaces where all are free to explore and connect. Libraries are one of the few places in Denver where people from all backgrounds and circumstances are welcome free of charge. Since 1956, Denver Central Library has played a vital role in providing access to transformative resources and information for all Denver residents. Which is why on Sunday, November 3rd, the Denver Public Library invites you to come celebrate the grand reopening of the Denver Central Library. You'll experience a renewed sense of wonder as you explore 6 floors of redesigned spaces, like the new Children's Library and the one-of-a-kind teen space. Enjoy live entertainment, refreshments, giveaways, and more. RSVP is encouraged at denlib.org/celebrate. That's denlib.org/celebrate.
Oh, it's such a clutch off-season pickup, Dave.
I was worried we'd bring back the same team.
I meant those blackout motorized shades.
Blinds.com made it crazy affordable to replace our old blinds.
Hard to install?
No, it's easy. I installed these and then got some for my mom. She talked to a design consultant for free and scheduled a professional measure and install.
Hall of Fame son.
They're the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings in the world.
Blinds.com is the GOAT.
Shop Blinds.com right now and get up to 45% off select styles. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Connected to this crime conversation is just the perception of crime. There's a lot of people in the suburbs don't feel comfortable coming downtown anymore. And we've heard, and we've been talking about this a lot on the show recently, but from restaurateurs specifically, they say that Denver is a hard place to do business right now because people aren't going out to restaurants as much. But the other thing that they're talking about is the minimum wage.
Yes.
Rising minimum wage and this crime perception is leading many restaurateurs to choose to open new places elsewhere. Do you think that the minimum wage is too high?
It's a great question. I have talked with a lot of these restaurateurs about this. And you're right. The biggest issue by far for them is the tip minimum wage. I do not believe the minimum wage is too high. But I do believe the structure we have for the tip minimum wage right now is inequitable across the staff at a restaurant. So I'll give you the examples they give to me. If you have a $13 or $14 tip minimum wage minimum for a server, and then you have any tips they receive on top of that, but then you have someone working in the back of a restaurant who's just receiving normal minimum wage, that person's making $17 an hour, they're making $34,000 a year total. Someone that's making $13 tip minimum wage plus their tips is making $80 or $90 or $100,000 a year, which is great for that individual. But that means literally restaurants will say, I can't hire any managers because all the managers would be taking a pay cut to move from being a server to a manager. I can't keep my back of the house staff because they're making 1/3 of what the servers are making. So in an attempt to bring up the wage of servers, we've driven massive inequities of the pay structure of these businesses in a way that makes it very hard for them to attract and keep staff. And so we are working on some innovative ways to say, how could we guarantee the mission of what we want, which is everyone is guaranteed a minimum livable wage. It could actually be even higher than the current minimum wage, but you could guarantee it to all of the employees at a restaurant so that you don't have these massive disparities. And you could potentially help cover some of the overall costs that businesses are struggling with on that payroll. So I don't think...
So what are we talking about, though? These restaurants are closing now. Is this a priority? Are we going to change something?
Yeah, we've talked already. I'll give you an idea of the kind of idea that we're thinking of. So you could, for instance, have a restaurant say, we could have a Denver seal of approval as a good partner restaurant. And what that restaurant would say is, we commit to actually everyone in our restaurant getting $20 an hour or more, $25 an hour, pick the number. But in exchange, what we will do is not use the tip minimum wage as it's currently structured. What we would do instead is say a service charge, a 20% service charge across the entire board. That means they would take all that money off the top, and it could be used to now spread to pay all employees, so everyone had at least $25 or whatever.
The servers don't like this, though.
Servers
We've
may not
seen
like
people
this.
try this. Like Danny Meyer tried this. His servers revolted. They all left his companies.
Yeah, but here's the
back.
interesting thing. What you would have is, if that were the case, then if you had a service charge is a charge above the bottom line on a bill, which means it's taxed. So if you put in a service charge, if you paid $100 for dinner and you tip someone, that's not taxed. If you put in $100 and you had a service charge, that's $120. We're taxing you on $120. That's a 20% increase in the tax rate the city would collect from that restaurant. We could then take some of that money to share back with restaurateurs to defray their costs, to help support staff, to help. I mean, you could have an incentive where both the city would be whole and the restaurant could use dollars to cover the increasing cost of food or cost of rent or cost of labor. So we think there are ways to look for a win-win partnership. And we know the challenge is, in that situation, would servers make less for all the rest of the folks in the restaurant to make more? Yes, but I think that is an equity question. I think that it's great to support servers. There are a lot of folks working to make my meal who are working very hard that I don't see at my table. And right now we're losing them in droves because they are not the beneficiary of that requirement. I was not expecting to have this deep dive in this conversation, but I'm spending a lot of time on it with restaurateurs because we think one of the things we're very proud of is our food scene in Denver. We want great restaurateurs to stay here. And this is a real challenge, well intended by the policymakers to put it in place. But it is, what they'll say is the markets are, you're paying $13 or $16 tip minimum wage to start in a restaurant in Denver. You're paying $10 in New York. $10 an hour, you're paying $2 in Atlanta or Houston or Dallas. So the math is quite simple. If 70% of your cost is labor, and that is a 500% increase over what you pay in a different market, that's a real driver.
Yeah, they're not making money. Stoney over here, he says he's going to Winter Park to open his next restaurant. Stoney's
We can't let him do
bar.
that.
Yeah, I know. I didn't like it. I don't like hearing that.
But it's a good thing for us to wrestle with this progressive, right? Because you don't want to say, all right, let's drop the minimum wage back to, let's cut the minimum wage. That's not necessarily the answer. But the answer is the idea of it was everyone should be guaranteed a basic quality of living. That is true. But there should still be some equity within a business around that. And I think we can do both.
Let's switch gears and talk back more about the budget process, because there's been a big disagreement between you and City Council about the Denver Basic Income Project. A majority of council advocated for you to fund the project for another year, and last week you informed that you would prefer not to. Why not fund the Denver Basic Income Project for another year?
I'm happy to talk about this. I've worked on this for probably 3 years or more. I worked on this at the foundation I was at before I started, where we were early investors in the Denver Basic Income Project. Love and respect the team working on this there. I think there was a specific policy question we were facing in the city, which is it more cost effective and more effective to get people who are currently homeless into housing by using a basic income strategy versus by using something that we would call rapid rehousing. So rapid rehousing is we find a unit and we pay your rent for a year. And you move in and you have a year to get yourself up and on your feet and up and ready. The basic income project is you find someone who's currently unhoused and you give them $11,000 of cash and let them sort the problem out on their own. The principle that people that are low income should have autonomy to make decisions on their own, I totally agree with. The question is, if you ever, I'm going through buying a house right now. It is the hardest thing I'm doing in my life, separate from running the city. It's just managing, putting all the files and documents and realtors and projects together. Renting can be similarly difficult. You got to navigate the market. You got to find people you got to visit. You got to do background checks. You got to sign long-term rental agreements. And to do that as someone who's also trying to manage coming out of being unhoused, that is a lot to manage. And so what we have found is the data from the Basic Income Project shows it is having a positive impact on the, I think, mental health and wellness of the folks that receive those dollars. Don't dispute that. What we don't see is that it is more effective or more cost effective at getting someone from being unhoused to being housed than a comparable strategy would be like rapid rehousing. So our obligation is to use taxpayers' money as effectively as we can to get the results that people are asking for. And right now, this tool is not the most effective tool we have to get people housed at the most cost effective structure. But that's why at this stage, it doesn't seem to be more effective than the other plans we have.
I can just see someone saying, well, why not both? You know what I mean? Why not the rapid rehousing approach, but also continue to try this approach? Multi-pronged approach, I guess, to this housing issue.
Yep. We try to develop specific solutions for specific problems. On this one, the specific solution was, can we get people into housing quickly and affordably? If I had said to you, hey, I have two strategies for home ownership. One allows us to build affordable homes for $400,000 a piece, and one allows us to build homes for $200,000 a piece. Should we do both? You would say no, just do the $200,000 a piece as much as you can. And so I think our obligation to taxpayers is to make sure we're delivering the best quality service at the lowest cost. And for this specific case study, I don't think that this is the best portfolio, but we're always open to learning more.
I think it was Denverite quoted that your budget includes $80 million less for homelessness issues this year, despite the fact that you're still pretty far from achieving your goal of ending unsheltered homelessness in your first term. How are you going to slow down with the spending and also hit those goals?
I'd take that glass half full version of that, which is we're ahead of our goals for year 1.5. Actually, you can hear it first on CityCast. We will already, as of today, cross our goal for 2024 of having 2,000 people brought off the street and into housing. So we've already housed 2,000 people in about 15 months. That's faster than scheduled. We will be the largest big city in America ever to end street homelessness for veterans in the next 2 months. But the reason why, and we said this last year when we were criticized for it, was we knew we had to build the infrastructure to house people. And that meant bringing on about 1,000 units of housing. That meant buying hotels. That meant building tiny home villages. That meant a lot of capital costs we had to build. We now have those units up and running, and now all we need the resources for are the services to support people at each of those sites. So a big drop was we had to make a big 1-year surge to bring on capital, to bring on the buildings. Now that we have those, it's ongoing services. So I think this is a more stable, a long-term plan to fund services, and that's at around 57, 60 million a year. We were at like 140 last year. And so for us, that's why we said it would be high in year one and then it would come down. It is coming down. It's not because we're underinvesting in services. It's because we use those federal dollars we had under ARPA to acquire the units, and that what has put us so far ahead, I think.
So what's the challenge here? What's the next challenge?
I'll tell you exactly. The next challenge is what we've done in stage one was we brought on these 1,200 units. Let's call it 1,000 units for round numbers. So we can bring 1,000 people off the street and get them into those units. If they stay for a full year in those transitional housing sites, we can do 1,000 people a year. Our real focus now is on the really quality case management and getting people access to housing to move them out of these transitional sites into permanent housing. So that's what we're working really hard to get better at now. And we should be able to move next year 2,000 in and out. And the following year, 3,000 to 4,000. By the end of term one, if we can do 4,000, that will be twice the entire homeless population. We should be able to make that work.
So is that the goal for 2025? Another 2,000 people?
Yes. You keep luring me into saying things that I'm not supposed to say publicly yet. But we've talked about this somewhat publicly. But yeah, our goal is to try to get 2,000 into the system and 2,000 out. That would be twice as fast, twice as much. But we think this infrastructure with better case management would help us do that.
All right, we're going to wrap up with a question from a listener that we got for you. This is also just something that Bree's been, got her eye on.
Things I'm annoyed by.
on the list. So this is from Keith A. Keith writes, "It would be great if you could push the mayor on his plan to start enforcing traffic laws. There is a general sense that Denver police are ignoring people with no license plates, speeding, running red lights, and all around reckless driving in our neighborhoods. So the question is, what are you doing to enforce our traffic laws?"
Thank you. And this is kind of like our earlier conversation about minimum wage, a good example of a combination of progressive policies we have to sort out. First thing is I want to be clear on a couple of things. Folks driving without a license plate at all, that is an immediately stoppable and ticketable offense. Our officers are instructed to do that. They are doing that. What we've done with folks that have not updated, that have expired tags, is we do cycles of this. We'll take a couple of weeks and say, hey, we're not going to enforce right now, but make sure you get them done, because starting November 1, we're going to do a real enforcement engagement, and we'll do 2 or 3 weeks where we are stopping every single person with an expired tag and ticketing them. We did that this summer, and it worked very well. Let's talk about speeding.
Well, the expired tags, though.
Yeah, here's the deal, Mike. I don't care about the expired.
Bree is very serious about this.
Well, I don't care about the expired tags. I kind of almost think that that's a waste of time. The things that I'm more concerned about are I live off of Federal Boulevard, speeding, racing,
yes.
dangerous driving in general, that makes it dangerous to be not only a pedestrian or a cyclist, but also just a driver trying to obey the traffic laws. It's just, that to me is what is more present as a problem than just somebody with expired tags.
Totally
you know
agree.
what I'm
I was
saying?
just starting with the lowest level, because I do get a lot of complaints about expired tags.
Well, that's the thing, is I know people care about that. It doesn't seem to me to be the real problem, though.
I agree with you. I am much more focused on speeding, and that one I want to talk more about. So speeding, we are doing active speed enforcement in a number of ways. One is, yes, we have officers out there. Again, more officers on patrol. This is why we're adding more officers to the force. It'll be about 300 over 2 years, because we do need more people who can patrol in more places. But the other one is we are going to use more speed cameras, and I think these are important and they work. And actually, we announced on Federal itself, which is right now one of the most dangerous corridors. Right, we are going to start with a lot more speed camera enforcement that can both catch people, ticket people, and give them consequences without having to pull officers that are there all the time. I think that's fair. We all agreed that the rules were that. Previously, you just think, well, if I break the rules and don't get caught, it's okay. If you break the rules, we will catch you.
That way.
People drive that way. So we are going to increase enforcement around the city through speed cameras. I'll let you know, we did last year on auto theft. It was a huge crisis. And we tried this at the airport. We put a lot more cameras on the airport. They're called license plate readers. We don't use them for speeding. It's just to find your license plate. So if you call and say, hey, my car got stolen at the airport, we can find out exactly where you were, when it exited, where it went, what direction it went. We put 111 of those cameras all across the city, so we can know exactly where the car is and how to track it. And we've dramatically dropped auto theft in a year. So I think the same is true for speed cameras. Most of us probably know exactly where speed cameras are or where the noticed sign is, and you change your behavior. Sixth Avenue, Spear.
Mm-hmm.
So we will do much more speed enforcement. We're going to do things to help slow traffic in those places too. Everything from rumble strips to signal timing. I'll tell you, one of the things we do is signal timing on Federal Boulevard. It's called rest at red, which means at low traffic times, like 11 o'clock at night, where all you might be doing is drag racing and not coming home from work. Some people are. Rest on red means all the lights stay at red until a car comes up to the stoplight, stops, and then your presence triggers the light to know you're there, and then it turns to green.
I like this option much more than just increased surveillance, but
yeah, I know. As opposed to leaving lights at green, you think, oh, it's low traffic, leave them at green. That encourages drag racing or speed racing. So there are a number of strategies, both rest on red, signal timing, but also it's about built infrastructure for things like protected walkways,
I was going to say,
bikeways.
Giving pedestrians not only the time to cross, but the safety and the visual space to feel like they're safe.
Yes, and we're doing all the above. We are expanding funding on our Safe Routes to School, which are walkways in front of schools, to do that also. So I think this is a really important quality of life issue. We're aware of it, and we're going to be quite committed to it.
Well, listeners, Keith and Sarah, thanks so much for the questions. And Mayor Mike Johnston, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for having me back. Always great to see you.
Thanks, Mayor. This was great. And here's what else Denverites are talking about: the 70 acres of parking lots around Ball Arena. Late on Monday night, after we recorded this conversation with the mayor, City Council debated and signed off on local billionaire Stan Kroenke's proposed redevelopment of the parking around Ball Arena. While the tentative plans promise to bring affordable housing along with luxury development, some council members express concern over what affordability will actually mean once the bulldozers come out. One thing is certain. Kroenke Sports and Entertainment must keep the Avs and the Nugs playing somewhere in central Denver until at least 2050, even if that isn't at the Ball Arena we know today. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed this show, why not take a minute to tell your friend who's been driving around with expired plates about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter and learn more about us at denver.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. See you later.